Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this second webinar in a series of 3 webinars that we're organizing this month, in which we explore the power of behavioral science to look at 3 really interesting problems. So last week we had a webinar on sales and how to approach the world of selling by studying it through the lens of behavioral science. Today, we're going to talk about innovation. I think a very, very fascinating subject. And tomorrow, we have a 3rd webinar on team behavior and how we can, look at how to design happy, productive, and creative teams using, the power of behavioral science. So my name is Tom de Bruijn. I'm one of the co-founders of SUE Behavioral Design. We're an Amsterdam-based behavioral design company. And just to give you a little bit of background, what is behavioral design? Well, what behavioral designers do is they try to turn a deep human understanding, a deep understanding of the psychology of the users, and turn that into interventions for behavioral change, which could mean better communication, better marketing, better products, better services, better customer experience, better policies, if you will, better ways of collaborating with each other. Behavioral designers think hard about how can we use the psychology of influence, how can we use a deeper understanding of humans to influence minds and to shape behavior and to build habits in a very positive way. And so today we're going to talk about innovation, and I think innovation is such a fascinating domain because we tend to think of innovation mainly through the lens of technology. We always, when we think of innovation, we think of these highly successful, technology companies that really disrupted markets. And in this webinar, I want to make the case for something different. I really think that what unites successful innovators is that they are much better at understanding psychology, and that psychology truly is a superpower for innovation. And if you think about innovation, innovation is nothing more than trying to find new and smarter ways to solve customer problems, to solve interesting problems. And I think that quite often when the focus is too much on design and on technology, quite often innovations fail dramatically because they turn out to be a solution to a problem that didn't exist. It was a solution in search for a problem. Whereas if you start the journey for innovation and look into psychology as your source for innovation, your source for ideas, and more importantly, your source for finding interesting problems worth solving, then I think there's really this interesting untapped territory for innovation. And I even think that most dramatically interesting and disruptive innovation really isn't that much about incredibly difficult technology. Quite often, it's just a matter of finding a sweet spot between technology, design, and psychology. And once you find that sweet spot, you can really find something that people want to have or that people want to embrace to change their behavior. Because nothing really is more difficult than getting people to change their behavior. So that's what we're going to explore. And I want to, what I would like to do is to start with a simple riddle. So my presentation, this webinar is going to try to provide an answer to 3 simple, interesting, fascinating problems. So this is the first one. A soda drink that was consistently labeled as the most disgusting drink that people ever tasted when they were about to get launched. Second thing is a deeply flawed person who became the most powerful man on earth for 4 years. How is that possible? And the third riddle is, this is actually a picture from a hilarious blog, a hilarious Tumblr called Boyfriend of Instagrammers. So the interesting phenomenon here is how come that there are so many people who simply for whom reality is nothing more than a stage in which they are constantly performing for their followers, which I think in the most exaggerated case is all these poor suckers who have to turn up day and night to film their girlfriends because of Instagram. I actually live in the center of Amsterdam, and it's hilarious to see how Amsterdam turned from something beautiful, worth watching, into becoming a stage for people who are simply using Amsterdam to continuously talk to their followers. They're not present anymore. They are constantly performing on the stage. So this technology has become so addicted and has succeeded in tapping into our deepest psychological needs that that reality has become a complete subject to that technology. I think that's quite fascinating. So we're going to try to find answers to these three riddles. But what they do have in common is that they all apply behavioral science to influence minds and shape behavior. And therefore, by putting psychology at the core, putting psychology at the center of what they do, they really were able to disrupt the complete category. Red Bull was able to disrupt their category. Trump completely disrupted politics, and we can argue that Instagram and other social media platforms not only disrupted media, but you can easily argue that they completely disrupted life as we live it. So a little disclaimer, of course, up front, always should do that. You can immediately grasp when I use the captivative power of Instagram, or the deeply seductive power of Donald Trump, that you can think of the science of influence, behavioral science, as a dark wisdom, as a psychological superpower. And that's of course true. You can use that dark wisdom, to get people hooked to smartphones, or to manipulate their deepest fears and anxieties. But I also want to make the case that we can use exactly the same understanding for positive forces. To figure out how to get people to start working out, or to eat healthy, or to become participating citizens in society. Exactly the same science and exactly the same techniques can both be used for bad and for good. So we would definitely want to focus on how can we apply these psychological superpowers to shape positive behaviors, whether that would be in consumer behavior, citizen behavior, work behavior, or your personal behavior. So for those of you who attended the previous webinar last week, and definitely the ones who are going to attend the webinar tomorrow, we at SU, we always return to like the cornerstone of understanding influence. And I'm in every talk, I'm always returning back to this cornerstone, because if you understand how the mind works, if you understand how our brain makes decisions, then you basically, if you have that understanding right, then this kind of explains everything. So it's really, really always important, and you might have heard it 100 times, but I always want to return to this fundamental idea of human decision making. And this fundamental idea of human decision making, I mean, if you want to understand influence, you need to understand how people decide, how people make decisions. And this fundamental idea really is the theory of two Israeli psychologists, Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, two Nobel Prize laureates who basically were the first psychologists who won the Nobel Prize in economics for their deep thinking about thinking. And the essence of the thinking of Kahneman and Tversky was that we kind of have two brains in our head. We kind of have two decision-making systems in our head. And understanding the workings of these two systems really is the key to understanding not only influence, but also understanding innovation. And what Kahneman and Tversky discovered was that these two decision-making brains that we have, they call them System 1 and System 2, operate in a highly different way. So the majority of our decision-making is done by System 1. Kahneman called this as our intuition, our instinct. This really is our fast brain. And this fast brain, I think the best way to look at it is that this fast brain is constantly scanning, constantly predicting. It's constantly working in the background to help us to make decisions without having to think. Given the fact that there are 17,000 decisions on an average day that are being presented to us, it would be quite dramatic to have to think all these decisions, to think them through. So we don't have to do them. We can perfectly drive a car knowing that people who cross our car won't suddenly change directions and crash into us. We can perfectly not have to think about that because our system one, our predictive modeling machine, has learned that people in 99% of the time will stick to their lane. So that's a problem we don't need to think about. We do think about it. Our system one is processing it, just like all these other 17,000 decisions, but we don't have to think about it rationally. And then there's our rational brain. And this rational brain really is this, I would say, well, it's definitely the slave of our automatic brain, in the sense that we think of our rational brain really as the hero in the story, because we think that we are rational. And when we try to influence others, we really also think that these others are incredibly rational, that they kind of make cost-benefit analysis, that they try to figure out with as much information as possible to make up their mind and then make a decision. Well, it turns out that this is kind of an illusion. What Kahneman and Tversky discovered time and again was that this rational brain of ours really is the little slave of our intuitive brain. In other words, our intuitive brain makes up its mind very intuitively. It does that automatically and unconsciously. And then a rational brain is being used to post-rationalize our intuitive decisions. If you decided that you like a person, then your rational brain will look for confirmation to confirm that this person indeed is a very likable person. And that's really a bit of a mindfuck, because when we put on our professional hat, we kind of have the inclination, definitely when we have to sell our ideas to quite rational stakeholders higher in the organization, we kind of approach the end user with through their system too. We try to convince them, we try to persuade them with rational arguments. Well, it turns out that you can't persuade or convince someone if their system one hasn't already decided that they want to be convinced. In other words, we first need to seduce in order to be able to convince. And of course, you can perfectly understand that in your political thinking, if your system one has decided that you hate a certain type of politicians, then no matter what these people say, you will discard everything they say because you already decided that you don't want to be convinced. Which is, I think, quite a good explanation here in the Netherlands. There's quite a toxic political debate, and no one wants to take anymore the arguments that are being used by the other side, because we already have decided that the other side is the enemy. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there to get away from these us versus them dynamics and try to figure out a new way of designing a context of communality, so that we can become a we again, in which we can have a healthy discussion with each other. But that's definitely something for another webinar. But these workings of system one and system two are incredibly important. Why? Because whatever you do, whatever product you make, whatever intervention you're trying to design, you're dealing with system one. You're dealing with this intuitive brain that within a split second decides whether this is awesome or not, whether it will be trusted or not, whether you will trigger curiosity or not. So I think the most pragmatic way to think about influence is that it's all about offering shortcuts to system one to help us to make decisions without having to think. I would say that when I look at my work as a behavioral designer, I think that the best way to describe my work is that I'm a designer of choices. Because the way we think about designing choices completely influence how people perceive choices. And if we, take this automatic brain that is constantly scanning for shortcuts, if we take that as our, mental model to think about influence, then what we need to think about is, how do we present reality? How do we present shortcuts so that system one immediately will look at reality exactly through the way that we want them to look at reality, so that they might be able to embrace it and to start changing their behavior accordingly. So let's explore this idea. Well, there's the first example in our riddle, of what does these three completely unrelated, interesting problems have in common. The backstory of Red Bull is that when they first wanted to launch in the test, everyone thought it was completely disgusting. So the normal thing for a marketeer to do is to think, we need to completely reshape the flavor of this drink because people will completely hate it. What Red Bull did was something much more brilliant from a psychological perspective. They kind of changed the frame in which we were invited to look at the problem. And what Red Bull basically did was a psychological magic, psychological innovation. They said, look, from now on, the world of soda drinks consists of two kinds of drinks. There's the soda drinks, that's the sweet world of the Coca-Colas and the Fantas and the Sprites and the iced teas. And then there's the energy drinks, that's our world. We are not a soda drink. If you drink our problem and you think you're a soda drink, this is a soda drink, you're basically an idiot. You don't get it. We are in the world of energy drinks. And by simply using that system one shortcut, by reframing reality, people completely changed their perception about the product, because suddenly the product made sense. It kind of tasted like medicine, so it must be this powerful energy boosting drink. Otherwise, it wouldn't taste a bit like medicine. They put it in smaller cans, they made it more expensive, so suddenly everything makes sense. Reality kind of flips when you present a new frame to look at reality. That's really the power. And once people are persuaded or seduced that they want to drink this to maintain high energy levels, then they completely tell themselves different stories about the flavors. They start telling themselves stories that the flavor is not so bad. It must taste a little bit weird, otherwise it wouldn't work. I actually kind of like it now that I give it a second try. This all kinds of what we call system 2 post-rationalization, once people have decided to look at reality through a different perspective. This is a completely different example, but exactly the same mechanism. This is Eneko, a green energy company in the Netherlands. And I was really, really impressed with, once you enter their building, this is what you get to see. Now, with every other corporate building in, not only in the Netherlands, in every country, the first thing you see is this funnel towards these security people who are sitting behind a desk, and everything in the room signals to your system one, we don't trust you. We will first check you out thoroughly before we can allow you to get in. And so everything signals this is, we don't like you, we don't trust you. You first need to prove yourself before you get past us. Eneko completely reshaped that experience. And so when I enter with my system one on, my system one first encounters a hostess, a hospitality person who steps right to me with a laptop, say, "Hi, good morning, can I help you? Nice to have you here at Eneko. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, I do. I have an appointment with this person." The hostess looks at their laptop. "Yeah, come, I exactly see it. Here's a badge. I will assist you through our coffee shop on the other side of the gate. And can I offer you a cappuccino or a tea or an espresso? Please have a seat. Your appointment is on its way." Everything in that room signals you are very welcome, and we as a company are all about giving you a great customer experience. And the way they do that is purely through psychological innovation, because there's not that much new technology involved, but they kind of completely reshape the context in which the choice, in which the behavior is being presented to you. A very friendly, really customer experience, high-end customer experience kind of setting. So my last example of System 1, how the workings of System 1 and how we can use it when we think about innovation, is how we present choices. We quite often are not aware of the power of the words that we use. And so every word we use triggers thoughts, feelings, and images. And we need to be very, very conscious of that. So imagine that I'm your doctor, and I just made a diagnosis, and turns out that I discovered this rare disease. And I can present my findings to you in two completely different ways. So the first way that I present my finding to you is, look, there's a treatment, and this treatment has a 90% chance of saving your life. I just discovered this disease. Well, luckily there's a treatment, and there's 90% chance of that this treatment will save your life. You will go, yes, let's have it. Sounds good. Luckily you discovered it on time. I can present you the same information, but in a completely different kind of way. I can say, I have bad news for you. I just discovered this disease. I researched your symptoms, and I'm 100% positive it's this rare disease. I must warn you, there is a treatment, but there is a 10% chance of failure resulting in death. Now, what I just did with this second way of presenting reality is that purely from a factual point of view, I just did exactly the same. However, in the second way of presenting the informations, I just triggered all alarm bells. I triggered anxiety, I triggered panic, I triggered images of death, and you will go out with a complete high level on panic. And that's what actually hospitals are now, and even technology companies working for hospitals are now realizing that you can have as many great equipment as you can in a hospitality setting, but turns out that managing the emotions and managing the expectations of someone entering a hospital who's already in a high state of anxiety and stress is an incredibly important factor in predicting a good outcome of the treatment process. So even technology companies like GE and Philips are now rapidly discovering the importance of, understanding this psychological layer on top of the design layer and the technology layer. Okay. So as I said, behavioral design is all about the design of choices. We are behavioral designers, are choice designers. And the way we craft our choices completely determine how people, or the way we present choices completely determine how people think, feel, experience, and even behave in the rooms. So I think there is what I want to do is explore a couple of opportunities for psychological innovation in marketing. There's hundreds of them, but I really want to pinpoint a couple for this webinar. And the first one is that if you want to think about psychological innovation, you definitely want to think first about the choice architecture, the choice context in which you present an offer or in which you present a product. Because the context in which you present it completely determines how system one, our automatic brain, experience it. There's this running gag that says, if you want to sell Lamborghinis, try to sell them at a boat fair. Because at the millionaire boat fair, when you look at all these boats that cost at least 50 million, the $2 million or euros Lamborghini actually feels like a little bargain into the millionaire's world. Same goes with Rolex, because the choice context already provides a lot of sheds a lot of light and a lot of meaning onto the Lamborghini there. So there's a couple of fascinating examples. I just want to pick out. Let me pick out two. A bread baking machine at the web shop Williams Sonoma didn't sell at all until they put a second bread baking machine next to it. Our system one has no idea what a bread baking machine should cost. But suddenly, when a more expensive bread baking machine is being presented, and we quickly learn that the differences are rather trivial, then we suddenly have our system one has enough information to determine that the first bread baking machine really feels like a bargain. In price psychology, they actually call this a bit of a decoy. The luxury brands have kind of lifted decoy thinking into an art form. Like Louis Vuitton always wants you to look at their most expensive items first, because they want to imprint to your system one this whole idea that this is a very, very upscale luxury brand. Well, it turns out that the majority of their sales are like the 300 euro sunglasses or the 300 euros wallets, which feel like a bargain once you are confronted with a 10,000 euros handbag. And if you would have put the same wallet in a simple H&M store, people would think you're completely crazy. A wallet of 300 euros, are you out of your mind? In an H&M store, it doesn't make any sense. But in this choice architecture, it feels like a bargain. What General Electric did to their product was also pure, I think, a brilliant example of psychological innovation. So when you need to do a CT scan, and definitely when you need to do a CT scan with children, doing a CT scan is a terrifying experience, definitely for young children. Well, what GE came up with is that they completely redesigned the whole experience of going into a CT scan. And so what they did is they already created a journey, a story journey that really starts at the before kids enter the room, and they are being brought into an adventure story, and the adventure starts in the dressing room. Then they enter the room. The room is already completely painted in the theme of the adventure. Then, as a part of the search, as the quest for solving the riddle and solving the problem, is by going into the scanner and doing a couple of tasks. And so before you know it, the kids go out of the scanner and they want to have more of it because the story hasn't finished yet. I think this is absolute genius because it costs only a fraction. I think it will probably cost 0.1% of the cost of this scanner, but it has a tremendous effect on how people go into the scanner, and it has a tremendous effect on the success of the procedure, because what they basically did is they perfectly understood the anxiety, and they created a whole new choice architecture to get rid of that anxiety. They put the deep psychological understanding of their user into the design process, and they didn't, and this is really a key to understanding behavioral design, they didn't think inside out. They didn't think, how can we make the product more interesting or less threatening? They thought outside in, and were thinking, okay, we have someone here coming into this room with a high level of anxiety. How can we take that as our point of departure and start to design a whole procedure to reduce or even get rid of that anxiety? And our favorite example, those of you who did the behavioral design fundamental course have seen the video clip. I'm not going to pester you with this one, but this is a great example of negative choice architecture. Most of you would probably easily want to pay 100 or 150 euros to see Ed Sheeran in a concert, and it will sell out within, let's say, 20 minutes. And you can watch the clip later on YouTube. There's a beautiful example of two Australian comedians who put Ed Sheeran up a chair in a peep show, and then tried to get people in to watch the Ed Sheeran peep show. And it took them about 4 hours to find someone who was willing to pay $2 to see Ed Sheeran, because everything in that choice architecture said, I don't trust this. I don't want this. This doesn't sound like a good value at all. Of course, once the first brave souls entered the peep show and realized that it was indeed Ed Sheeran sitting there on a stool, rumors started spreading, and then everyone wanted to come in. But I thought it was such a beautiful example of the power of this mechanism of thinking about choice architecture, because we quite often do a very, very lousy job in thinking about the choice in which we, for instance, try to trigger behavior. That's actually one of the, now come to think of it, that's actually one of the problems with digital marketing. Because in digital marketing, there's really no context in which we place our advertising. When you advertise on Facebook or on Instagram or on through banners on websites, what you're kind of signaling, the only thing you're signaling to the end user is that you are that you target these users based on what you know about them. On the contrary, if you, for instance, advertise on television, you're signaling much more, because the choice architecture, the context in which you present your ad, signals a lot about for instance, your confidence in your brand. If you advertise on television, then unconsciously, me as a watcher of television, I unconsciously already know, hey, this must be a high quality, high value brand with deep pockets, with a lot of confidence in the product. Otherwise, they would never advertise on television. Furthermore, I can also infer from the fact that you are on television that many other people will have seen this brand. So I can assume that if I buy this brand, I will know that other people have already heard about this brand, that this brand is popular, and that I don't make a deep fool out of myself for being the only one who took the risk of buying that brand. This is quite often an argument that's very much overlooked, is that the choice architecture of where you advertise, whether it would be on television, radio, or in the context of a highly respected brand, really has a great plays a great role in how we experience the value of the advertising. So this is psychological innovation number one. Psychological innovation number two, and these really are always my two key concepts when I think about influence. Like when you think about influence, when you think about behavioral science, when you think about the toolkit of a behavioral designer, there are really the two most important tools. The heaviest tools in our toolkit is, first of all, system one thinking. Thinking about the unconscious brain and thinking about how to work with that unconscious brain. And the second most important toolkit in our toolbox is outside-in thinking. And what is outside-in thinking is really the importance of, I would say, the skill to prevent yourself from thinking inside out. And that kind of is a shitty definition. So the difference between inside out and outside in thinking is that we as professionals, we have a very deep tendency to think inside out. Why? Because we are in love with our product. We are in love with our service. We have thought so much about the product that we can't even appreciate or even imagine that there are still people who completely don't get it. And so when you think inside in, the question you are asking yourself is, well, the problem of the customer is that they haven't figured out yet how awesome the product is. That really is the problem of the customer. And so what we need to do is we need to find better ways to convince the customer that this product is awesome. You stupid customer. That's really why I don't like this term customer-centric thinking. Because if you put the customer at the center of what you do, what you really do is you are always treating this customer as customer or potential customer of the product. Outside-in thinking is a radically different approach. What you do when you think outside-in is you kind of prevent yourself from thinking about the product, and you start thinking about the world of the end user. You start to think about their dreams, their goals, their frustrations, their pains, their problems that they have. And you kind of get very sensitive to that. You try to figure out, what do they need? What do they want? What prevents them from doing the right thing? What are deep frustrations that they are experienced today? What are kind of bad habits that prevents them from changing their behavior? And once you start to think outside, then you quickly start to find the greatest opportunity for psychological innovation. So the best example, of course, and again, those of you who did who attended one of our fundamental courses know this example by heart. The milkshake example by Clayton Christensen. If you try to sell milkshakes in a fast food restaurant and you try to boost the milkshake by tinkering with the product, then you will never sell more milkshake. If you start thinking outside in and you start asking yourself the question, what is the deeper need or the job to be done in people's life for which they come to this restaurant and buy a milkshake, then you suddenly discover that the majority of the people who come to a fast food restaurant to order a milkshake, they order that milkshake because they have a long and boring drive ahead of them. And the milkshake really is the best way to keep themselves busy, to fill their stomach while driving, compared with every other product that would just come over there or that would just don't fill their stomach. And so once you understand that this is the job to be done in their life for which they are finding a solution, or trying to find a solution, and for which the milkshake really is the best alternative, then you can start to realize how to market that milkshake. You can, for instance, start thinking about advertising the job to be done. I would put up billboards along the highway and say, hey, you have a long head in front of you. There's a McDonald's on the next exit. Hire a milkshake. It's your best friend for a long drive. I would also reframe it and call it a protein shake, to reduce the anxiety that at 8 o'clock in the morning, drinking a milkshake probably will make me feel very guilty that I'm again stuffing all kinds of bad carbs into my body. But if I can reframe it as a protein shake, the best possible, fluid breakfast to have in the car, I don't need to feel guilty about it anymore. So understanding people's deeper needs, their jobs to be done, really is the key to understanding behavioral change. It's the understanding how to not only design a product, as my example with the milkshake, I can literally think about completely reframing exactly the same product by completely putting it in a different, mental mindset. It's not just a milkshake anymore. It's a protein shake, and it's a product that is designed to help me to fill my stomach while I'm having a long drive in front of me. Without changing the properties of the product, I completely reprogrammed the way people could think about the product. This is a very, I think, hilarious example. A town in England called Teesside. People were complaining about potholes in the road for more than 2 years, and the city council just didn't do anything about it. And then suddenly someone came up with a brilliant idea. He drew penises around every pothole in the street. Well, the problem was solved within a week. And the reason why was that the job to be done for the city council dramatically changed. So the first job to be done, the first, I would say, need that people try to tap into when they were asking the city council to change, to fix the problem, was maintenance. Get your shit, dear city council, get your shit straight, do some maintenance work. And the city council just wasn't motivated enough to do that, or they didn't have the resources to do it. But by drawing penises around the pothole, it completely changed the question. Because now the job to be done for the city council was, we need to remove obscenity from our community as fast as we can, because we are not a community that tolerates obscenity. And so the problem was solved within the week, because the penises I would say again, reshaped the choice architecture for the city council. And so the question that they were answering was not a maintenance question, but was a remove obscenity question. Pure psychological innovation. This is a project we did for a couple of years ago for a health innovation company, Medtronic. They are a multinational that designs products and services for diabetic people. And when they, this is a Guardian Connect, a product they launched 2 years ago. It's basically a chip connected to your skin, and that chip is connected to your smartphone. And so magnificent for diabetic people, because it now tells you when your glucose levels are dropping. And when they introduced the product to us, they said, yeah, it still has a bit of a bug in it. I mean, there's this annoying alarm that goes off once your glucose levels are dropping. We still need to fix that. And so when we were interviewing diabetic people and we were showing some prototypes, we quickly discovered that what Medtronic thought was a bug, to them was a killer feature. Because the job to be done, the deeper need that these people have, that diabetic people have, was all the same. They all said, I want to live a normal life in which I don't want to be, confronted and interfered with my disease as little as possible. When you know diabetic people, or if you are one, you know how weird it feels when you are like putting a shot just like a heroin addict. It kind of feels a bit awkward. And so what people said, I love this, because if the alarm goes off, I perfectly know that I don't need to think about my disease and I can live a normal life just like my friends. I only need to think about my disease when the alarm goes off. That was a complete change of paradigm. And so what they thought was a bug really turned out to be a feature. And you can apply this outside in thinking to everything. So imagine that you are a consultancy firm, one of the big consultancy firms, and you are in a fierce competition, as an accountancy or as a management consultancy, to win the business of one of the big telco companies in the Netherlands. And you mainly need to persuade this person. Previously, this was the former CFO, and you need to persuade them. Well, a traditional way of trying to persuade them, what probably every consultancy does, is you try to persuade them by, telling all kinds of stories of how awesome you are as a consultancy and digital transformation of finance and how many fantastic brands you've been working for and that you have developed. That's what they all do, develop best practices that you can apply to their world. And it's not that this doesn't work. This is, of course, very valuable. The problem is that everyone uses exactly the same techniques. So once you start talking to that man, once you take the time to figure out what his deeper needs is, well, if you start to think outside in and you do a little interview, well, you would quickly discover that this man was obsessed with one thing and one thing only. He said, my mission in the organization is to help the organization to make better decisions through data. And so he passionately started talking about how he got the financial controllers to sit together with the business teams and that they are having stand-up meetings with live dashboard data. He said, I'm not interested in finance as such. I'm interested in, creating a better company that operates more successfully with data. And that was a client of ours. So when you start to frame everything you do within this frame of everything that you have to offer, whether it's your advice, whether it's your tools, whether it's your technology, whether it's your data models, as a way for people to make better, or for the company to make better decisions through data, through live data, you will immediately get this person, it's system 1, to fall in love. And then he will look for system 2 post-rationalization to confirm that his initial hunch really, or his initial feeling is the right one. And people will never admit this. This is the cool thing about psychology, is that if you would ask this person afterwards, what made you decide that this is going to be the party that you have decided to work with, he will come up with all kinds of hyper-rational reasons. What happens in reality is that his system 1 first fell in love, decided that this is what he wanted to have, and then he will look for the system 2 post-rationalizations. He will never, of course, admit that this was what he actually probably wouldn't even have realized it, that he first fell in love and then post-rationalized the decision. But he would definitely never use that in his argumentation, for instance, towards his boards, that it was an intuitive hunch, and then that he post-rationalized all the rational arguments to match with that hunch. This I'm going to skip that one because this is for the webinar tomorrow. Even when you think about work, you need to think outside in. What are the deeper needs and desires that people want to see fulfilled through work? And so once you understand these jobs to be done, it becomes perfectly obvious why some cultures are toxic, why some companies thrive, why some teams thrive within a companies and others don't. For the simple reason that some teams do a really, really good job at serving our deeper psychological needs, while other teams completely suck at it. And understanding those needs and designing a culture and designing interactions, and more importantly, designing habits that kind of trigger these desired behaviors is what I'm going to talk about in this webinar tomorrow. So definitely tune in if you're interested in that. I'm looking at the clock and I still want to have some time left for argument. So I have way more slides that than that we're going to be able to talk about. So I briefly want to touch upon a couple of last examples. This is outside-in thinking. To me, really is the key to approach the whole problem of vaccination and getting people, to undergo COVID testing in order to prevent society from getting into a lockdown again. I think not only was the biggest behavioral design challenge of the last couple of years, but it's definitely going to be one of the biggest behavioral design challenges in the upcoming years. We, as a company, we were already involved a lot in the previous lockdowns, and we are already working again on, thinking about and designing interventions to prevent society from having to go in a lockdown again. But the big problem, of course, is that when you think about people who are, let's say, vaccination hesitant, or people, I don't want to use the word radical, the radicalized words. People who don't want to get vaccinated for all kinds of reasons, whether you think they are legitimate or not is not relevant. There is a group in society that doesn't want to get vaccinated, and a lot of these people might potentially have really good psychological reasons for that. But the problem, of course, is, and now we have our, let's say, mental tools at our disposition to understand the problem, is that the more you try to convince them with rational arguments that they need to get vaccinated, the more their system 1 will get in defense mode. Because if they have decided that they don't want it, they will get in stronger and stronger resistance positions to those who try to persuade them through system one argumentation. So we did a lot of research and talked a lot to people who don't want to get vaccinated, and turned out that the best strategy to approach these people is by not talking about the vaccine, but talk about the job to be done. So instead of inside out trying to promote the virtues of getting vaccinated, the only way to work with society with the upcoming rise in contaminations again is by thinking outside in. What is the deeper job to be done that makes it worth getting vaccinated? Or if we don't want to get into vaccination, that makes it worth to get COVID testing. Well, it turns out that the best way to do that is to change behavior without changing beliefs. And if the job to be done, I say, we all want to go out. We all want our restaurants to remain open. We all want to spend times with our friends, don't we? We all want to avoid that we're going to get in a context in which we can't spend time with our loved ones again, in which we can't visit our grandmother again in the elderly house. That would be dramatic. Can we all agree on that one? Well, once you create this common ground based on people's deeper needs, they kind of open themselves a little bit more up to the desired behavior. There's actually a brilliant YouTube fragment about this young teenage girl. No, she wasn't young teenage. I think she was 18, maybe 20. And she was interviewed, and she was ranting about why she didn't want to get vaccinated and why vaccination is bad. And so the interviewer, after 2 minutes, so I said, so you're not vaccinated? She said, oh yeah, I am vaccinated. I said, oh, why are you vaccinated? Yeah, otherwise I couldn't get into McDonald's. And I said, okay, well, apparently it works this way. She's completely, in her belief system, she's radically anti-vaccination, but the job to be done of being able to go to McDonald's with her friends is more important to her. So she kind of treated it as a mild nuisance and went for it. And the same thing go with for instance, COVID testing, with PCR testing. How do you communicate? How do you get people to do PCR testing? And the trick here is not to talk about the virus, but to talk about the needs, the jobs to be done, the psychological drivers for doing it. So, for instance, people perfectly understand that if they don't want to get vaccinated, but they want to go to a family reunion, that they kind of want to get a little bit of an insurance to make sure that if grandma gets infected, or even worse, if grandma gets infected and dies, that you do want to have the insurance policy that it wasn't you who caused grandma to death or who caused grandma to get very sick. So instead of selling PCR testing as a way to detect the virus, a much better psychological, stronger way to sell it is to be sure and be able to at least have the evidence that you are perfectly fine and that you can have peace of mind when go to family reunion, because we don't want to be the one who is responsible for infecting our loved ones. I will pick out one or two more. A pain could be a great psychological reason to sell, I did this many times, is that I need to go to a meeting, but people feel very uncomfortable about it. Even if, which I'm not, but even if I would have strong debts about vaccinations, I can perfectly get a PCR test, because I kind of don't want to get people to feel very uncomfortable if I'm an unvaccinated person in a room with people who are quite scared of being contaminated. And so if you would just do a PCR test, your beliefs are perfectly fine, but be respectful of people who feel very insecure about it. Then we might get people on board who would otherwise have very, very strong opinions against it. And I really think that in this next upcoming wave, the importance of these kind of subtle psychological innovative ways of thinking will become much more important. Um, Yeah, we always think of Uber as a highly successful technology company. Well, I think that the key to understanding the success of Uber is that they took away the three most important pains and psychological frictions in the taxi experience. The most important one is not knowing when your taxi is going to arrive. A second most important one is not knowing if you can trust the driver, if he's not going to be ripped off. And the third most important one is the hassle of going through this transaction. And they kind of combined psychology, technology, and design to solve that problem. And by doing that, they completely disrupted the whole taxi industry. Very briefly touching upon a last one, because this is the most fun area of psychological innovation, is changing the question. Again, this sounds trivial, but it's a psychological superpower. And once you understand that, and again, this all has to do with the way that system one works and the way we think about influence. System one is a scanner, and the way we design choices, we as behavioral designers are choice architects, choice designers, the way we present the choice completely determines how our automatic brain experience those choices. So again, Donald Trump, our second example in our mystery, is a genius at choice architecture. He basically changed the question. He said, do you want a deal maker, or do you want to stick with those politicians who only think about themselves and who only think about the companies and the rich people? I'm a deal maker. I am going to make America great again. And by changing the frame of politicians versus deal makers, he can get away with everything. Because if you are a deal maker, you need to do some dirty work. You need to be a little bit of a crook in order to make deals with China, with the Russians, with Mexicans, with whoever. He brilliantly changed the question. This is one of my favorite examples. When you think about vegetarian hamburgers, you kind of think as the hamburger, but all the joy sucked out of it to make it vegetarian. Well, Beyond completely changed the frame, completely changed the choice architecture. They said, this is going to be the juiciest hamburger you ever have. This is not just a hamburger. This goes beyond hamburgers. And I thought that was just brilliant. It goes beyond hamburger. It's juiciest of the juiciest hamburgers. Oh, and by the way, it's plant-based. It's a completely different frame to think about the hamburger. And I always think it's a crime that we use the word taxes to think about taxes. I think we should reframe taxes as contribution money. We pay contribution fee in order to be able to benefit from all the, it's membership contribution. I pay taxes, and I pay a lot of taxes, to get my kid to go to affordable school, to make use of the best infrastructure in the world, to be able to use all government services that allow me to be an entrepreneur and not being bullied by corruption, etc. It's a contribution fee worth paying because I thereby have access to the best possible services in the world. And again, in the mindset of policymakers and politicians, this sounds like something trivial, but it's not. It's not trivial. It's incredibly important because it's the redesign of how people think about taxes. As long as we call it taxes, you are kind of a smart person to try to evade taxes because it's a burden that is being inflicted on you. But once you are someone who tries to avoid paying your contribution fee for all these beautiful service that you can use for free or for very low cost, you are kind of an asshole. And we need to be aware that we need to pay much more attention to the importance of psychology in the way we think about those things. And these things today are treated as trivial. I'm going to skip that one because we're 5 minutes. I only want to touch upon this one as my last example. So what's mainly as a conclusion also, I think that technology companies and more politicians have finally understood that we are in a race to the bottom of the psychological brainstem. Our deepest monkey brain has been discovered and been exploited for the last 10, 15 years. And usually it's those who are really, really strong at it, really, really good at it, are that we now see the most effect of it in society. Those who are shameless in exploiting our deepest psychological fears and desires are the ones who are scrupulous about it and who are very effective about it. And so technology apparently knows this all too well. It's shocking to see how technology shapes our identities. Technology shapes our social relationship. Technology shapes our happiness. We are constantly addicted to presenting the best possible version of ourselves through these social softwares, through these apps, because we are addicted to this dopamine releases that they bring us. And these technologies, these companies have understood more than any other company that if you combine the power of psychology, design, and technology, you basically can create very highly addictive monsters. But you can use it, and we should be aware of that, and we should fight it, and we should, as a society, put caps on that. And actually, there's a lot of work going on European level and definitely on other state levels as well. But we should also embrace it and see if we can use exactly the same kind of tools to shape positive behavior in work, in life, and even in personal relationship. So that's it for my story. We still have 4 minutes left. So quickly want to. Oh, great! Thank you so much. No, that's very kind of you. Any other comments? Christian Vonnem, I understand the psychology behind the vaccination example in Germany. You are not allowed to use public transport without wearing a mask. My experience is that in every train there are at least 10 people that don't wear a mask and nobody cares. For me, the example only works for me if the rules set are strictly controlled. What do you think? Thank you very much for this question. I'm very much in favor of face masks, because a face mask really is the only visible system 1 cue that signals that we all need to take care of each other. I think so. I'm glad that you say there are always 10 people who don't. Well, luckily there are at least 90 people who do, but 10 people still is way too much. So the question would then be, what would be the psychological intervention to reduce that number from 10 to 1? And I would argue that it definitely requires a couple of interventions. Being more strict might be a good one, but that's the traditional, more rational way. You will be punished or you will get a fine. And the problem is that these people who kind of insist on their freedom will actually see this as an even stronger evidence that their belief that society is trying to manipulate them into obedience. It strengthens their belief and it will strengthen the resistance. And in the Netherlands, there were a couple of examples of people working in the train who tried to impose it and really who got hit very hard. So you're kind of not incentivized to be the one who controls that. I would think that a different psychological approach would be more powerful, and it is that everything in the train kind of first signals. People always need to have signals of respect and appreciation. So my approach would be, look, whatever your opinion is on the virus and are getting vaccinated, you are free to have your own beliefs. However, we need to take care of ourselves. So in this train, which is a place with a high risk of contamination, wear a face mask in order not just for yourself, but to protect each other. We as a community need to do that. If you are in Berlin, we as Berliners, we need to take care of each other. If you don't do that, if you're still sitting there not wearing a face mask and you see that kind of communication, everything signals that you are an asshole, because your behavior is a signal of not being respectful to your community. And I think that might be a much more important and stronger incentive than the opposite one. I'm very, very sorry for talking too much. I definitely wanted to ask more questions. If you want to stick around, I'm going to talk for 5 more minutes. For those of you who have a tight schedule, there's going to be a webinar tomorrow about team behavior. I'm hosting it again, so if you like this, please join me again. at 10 o'clock. Read our blog. There's a massive amount of great posts on behavioral design on the blog. Attend the behavioral design masterclass. We have a great series of a 2-day fundamental course coming up this fall, both virtual and live here in Amsterdam. And if you're really interested in, applying behavioral design to, for instance, your marketing work or your product design work or UX or CX, and you want to work with a team of behavioral designers on an interesting challenge, call us. We can help through behavioral design sprints. That being said, I'm officially saying hi, but if you want to stick around, I can quickly ask. Oh, there's not that much questions anymore. Orange Discovery. Choice architecture very much focuses on influencing choice in the moment. And there are examples where there's need to create a sequence of decisions, actions to create habits. Oh, absolutely. This is definitely a great subject. I think there are a couple of sequences. You first need to trigger curiosity. Then you need to trigger excitement. Then when you were able to trigger excitement, you then need to trigger a micro conversion to get people to at least do a little interaction. Then you might, for instance, trigger them to leave their email or to fizzle with something or to taste something or to try something. Once you did that, then you need to convert them into a happy user, because your best prediction of getting someone who tried something into getting someone who buys something is that, are we able to design a wow experience? How fast can we get to design a successful experience that once people have played with it, whether it's a service or a product, that they immediately have the feeling, holy shit, this really works. If you can get them on this motivational high by creating this little wow experience, then that might be the perfect moment to get them to commit to, for instance, a program. And then the next big interesting sequence is, how do I build a habit? How do I shape behavior? And that's a matter of constantly triggering people back into using the product or using the service or using the program in a way that it becomes automatic. And once it becomes automatic, they get addicted to it. We're not addicted to the program. We're addicted to the feeling of success. So, for instance, if you work for a gym, the domain where gyms could apply the highest level, I would say, to reap the highest level of success in the whole sequence is by trying to reactivate people who fell off the workout habit. So if you can see in your data that people haven't worked out for 3 weeks, you need to call them because they are frustrated themselves that it just doesn't work anymore. And then you need to call them and say, hey, you need some help to get over it again and to experience success again. I'm going to help you. Shall we do a little class? Do you need a little bit of a personal trainer? But you apparently fell off your habit because you haven't experienced the wow experience yet. And again, understanding the psychology of quitting or stop using the app and thinking about designing these little success experiences so that people will get hooked again, I think might be a very interesting approach. But I absolutely adore what you are saying, is that behavioral design is all about designing sequences to convert reach into attention into excitement into visit into trial into in happiness, and happiness into habits. Yeah, sustainable choices. Evelyn, hi Evelyn. Do you also have examples of influencing people to make more sustainable choices, even if it's not in the personal interest in terms of comfort needs in the moment? Thanks for that question. My argument would be that the big problem with sustainable behavior is that we are selling it the wrong way. The problem is that we want people to embrace the sustainable behavior because it's better for the environment. And I want to take a radically different approach. I want to take an approach that people are fundamentally selfish and are fundamentally joy and job to be done driven. So if I want to sell sustainable behavior, I want to sell it over the egocentric motive. For instance, I now bought an electric car, and the reason for me to buy this electric car was, well, I might be convinced that we all need to make sustainable choices, but my unconscious brain always felt I don't want to be the first sucker who invests deeply into something. If the others don't do it, then it makes no sense. But I bought the electric car because it's an awesome car. I really fell in love with that car. It goes from 0 to 100 in a ridiculous amount of speed, and it looks cool. It looks like it's the Kia EV6. It looks like the honey badger, my favorite animal in the animal kingdom, because there's a great clip on YouTube. The honey badger is pretty badass, and I just wanted to have the most badass electric car there is. So I fell in love with it, and I think we should all do the same with food, with energy, with all sustainable choices. Figure out how the sustainable choice is a better choice for me as a person, and then I will switch automatically. Just like with Beyond Burger, it's being sold as the better version of the hamburger instead of the sustainable alternative to the hamburger. Hi Nick, everyone who has some addition. Yeah, okay. Well, one more question, and then I'll leave you. Organizations, communities are more multicultural, and people become more aware of neurodiversities. How much do you think the cultural background and possible neurodivergencies play a role in behavioral design and the way people make choices? Any tips on how these aspects can be addressed in behavioral design? To be honest, Ralu, thanks for this great question. I have never heard the word neurodiversity. I absolutely love it. I'm going to look it up. But you're absolutely right, of course. Communities are diverse. Culture plays an important role. And that's, I think, the beauty of behavioral design is that once you embrace the idea that behavior is incredibly contextual dependent, context matters a lot, then you can get much more excited about figuring out in which context you need to use which kind of, principles, which kind of tools. So that actually the current Nobel Prize in Economics, or the last year Nobel Prize in Economics, was given to 3 researchers. Esther Duflo was one of them, and I forgot the name of the other 2 companions. And they were studying the problem of poverty through behavioral science, behavioral economics. And indeed, the core of their findings was that if you want to design interventions to get people out of poverty, you need to be very, very respectful of context and cultural differences. So in one country, I think Bangladesh, you need to be fully aware that the mother-in-law really determines whether someone is going to embrace a new habit or not. The mother-in-law is the influencer, where in another country, it wouldn't matter at all. So yes, we need to. The beauty of psychology is that psychology is not an exact science, but it's a very, very useful science. And the problem is that some interventions that work brilliantly in one context just flatline in another context. And we as behavioral designers, we should stop nagging about does psychology work or not? No, we are practitioners. We should figure out in which context, which psychological principle works better than in which other contexts. That being said, please take a look at the website. Please subscribe to the email. We have a weekly email on behavioral design. Hope to see you tomorrow in the next webinar or in one of our trainings. But hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching. I was happily surprised with everyone. By the way, still happily surprised that there are still 35 people still watching my rambling. So I'm now going to shut down and leave you to your work. Thanks a lot, everyone. It's very kind of you to watch until the end. Bye.